Hi and welcome to the Tali Loz podcast, and I'm really excited to introduce Lauren, who is an eclectic witch. Hi Lauren.
Hi Laura.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good.
It's really exciting to be on here today.
I'm so excited about this one because I actually haven't got a clue about witchcraft. So I'm really excited to learn more today.
Great, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
So you are an eclectic witch. So what does that mean?
So I think the reason I kind of classify myself under that term is because I don't actually like to classify myself as any particular type of witch or follow any type of practice. But I feel like it's a good umbrella term just for somebody who likes to, still is within that sort of like witchy community, the sort of like mind frame. But I'd like to experiment with different things and, try different areas of my practice.
Of your practice. And so we do see a lot of the term Wicca as well, or pagan. Like, what's the difference between those type of terms?
So, well, in regards to being a pagan, that is a real umbrella term, which kind of encapsulates, essentially, it's an old term that was used to sort of, anybody that wasn't classically like Christian or under one of the big main religions would be called a pagan. Mm-hmm. I think nowadays with things like pop culture, with TV and, the way that witchcraft and paganism is displayed in them, there's people will instantly go to thinking that a pagan is a witch, but actually anybody who just has some sort of spiritual practice that doesn't follow one of the main religions is technically a pagan. It is a very old term that's used, and I think it is now adapted more days. You've got neo-paganism and things that people really like to claim is their term, and I will still identify myself as a pagan.
Yes.
And then when it comes down to the differences between witchcraft and Wicca, I think when I was younger, that was something that really confused me. Yeah. But actually, Wicca is an actual religion, and it's actually a relatively new religion. It was created around the 1970s by Gerald Gardner, and that does pull a lot of pagan practices and what he assumed were like old witchcraft practices, and he sort of created a religion around that. And so it's much more systematic. There's sort of a group of rules that you follow, different levels that you grow within that. And so that is for people who really want to feel that connection. They're still part of like a religious community, but more along with that sort of pagan thinking.
Oh, wow. And does the Wicca religion, as we should call it, do they have gods or goddesses as well?
Yeah, so they do worship, different deities, but predominantly you've got the triple goddess, when you see the symbolism of the moon, with the sort of three faces of the moon, she's the triple goddess, along with the horned god, who is sort of like the ultimate sort of symbolism of like masculinity. He's that forest god. Obviously, there are other gods and goddesses worshipped within that as well, but they tend to be really the main ones in the Wicca community.
Oh, wow. Okay, so witchcraft is different than Wicca.
Yeah, I think witchcraft it's such a broad term again, and it can get very confusing. And I think witchcraft is more, I would say, without sounding corny, it's more like a lifestyle than it is an actual sort of religious practice. And there are so many different elements to it, and people practice it in so many different ways. There's no one specific style to do it. You could have somebody living, across the world doing, completely different things, calling that their witchcraft practice, and it could be very different to say what somebody over here is doing. So yeah, it's a very broad term.
It's a very broad term. And what I did some research as well, because like I said, I didn't know anything about it, but I just find it extremely interesting, is that I think most people, when they hear the term witch, they almost see it as something, I want to say dark, or almost like a dirty word, or like, oh, everybody's like worshipping the devil and Satan. Well, actually, it's not. You could also be, just love being in nature and do foraging like yourself as well. Without any of that. It is actually being really in contact with yourself and nature as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there are so many different levels of like different times in history that have like portrayed people who classify themselves as witches in so many different ways
Mm.
that has really built up an image of today of what a witch is. I was talking to my best friend's little boy the other day, who's 6, and sort of joking around, saying I was a witch. I think we were talking about crystals or something. And he was
Yes.
like, "You're not a witch." And he's like, "Witches are like green skin and have a big nose and they're old ladies." And I'm like, that's only because you've been seeing that on TV. There's nothing else other than that is what a witch is. And I think, I think that's what we were exposed to as well growing up. And that has really shaped people's images towards what a witch is.
Yes.
And the other side is, I think people have this image in their head of a witch as being, like this sort of kooky forest lady dressed in lots of purple velvet, burning incense, that real sort of cliche 1970s new age person. And I think, a lot has been out there to sort of shape that image, and I think it's such a versatile thing now. I really think the real essence of witchcraft, what it is really about is, you can kind of believe in anything really that you want to be a witch, but one main thing that you need to sort of believe in is that, the concept of animism, that everything has a spirit to it. So that would be whether that's to do with the trees or water and all animals. And if you don't have that kind of deep understanding and reverence for the natural world, that is kind of what separates your sort of belief structure. So I think that, you don't have to be someone out there sort of doing spells and conjuring spirits and worshipping like dark gods and things to call yourself a witch. You could be someone who just, their practice is very gentle, and it's very much just about connecting with nature and those spirits of nature, and that can still be witchcraft.
Yes, I found that very interesting because I did not know that either. And then I was reading about that, and you told me earlier when we were talking as well, and it's like, maybe I could be a witch, because I do believe in everything has a spirit and everything is energy, and that crystals are very they should be a part of us, I think, but as well as trees.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everything. So, and I was like, oh, actually that is sort of what I believe in as well, but I don't identify myself as a witch, but it is that term that is so broad, and I think it's really cool. And then you have well, we sort of touched base on that as well. Like witchcraft, some people think witchcraft is always supernatural, but it is also, but not always. It could just be,
definitely
be in touch with the forest and or nature.
Absolutely, and I think it's everyone's got a different opinion of what their own sort of witchcraft practices are. But for myself, I really like to sort of try and envision maybe what my ancestors would have practiced. And I don't think back then they would have ever have said they were witches or connected with that. But my family and my ancestors come from all around the British Isles, predominantly Scotland and a bit of Ireland. And I think about, all the kind of traditional folk practices they would have had, particularly pre-Christianity, and they all revolved a lot around like ritual that was honoring the sun and the earth. And it was very much like, okay, well, we're going to go out today and we're going to sort of leave this offering, and we're going to honor the earth because we're about to collect the harvest, and we want to have like a good bounty of wheat this year. And, or we want really good weather for this. And it was really just about like working with the seasons and working with the land and working with your environment. And, I think back then they're probably, of course, especially in places like Ireland where they have such a connection to the fairy folk and things like that, there was that sort of spiritual element to it. But again, I don't think they would have connected it with thinking it was some sort of supernatural thing. It was really more a reflection of their landscape and just what they lived with in the land.
Yes.
So, I like to see it that way. I myself, I'm not particularly, in my practice, I'm not focusing on any sort of supernatural element. Occasionally, I do like to leave out offerings, and I like to keep certain sort of spiritual entities in mind, but I'm not kind of heavily working with particular, supernatural elements.
Yes, because you do a lot of foraging.
I do,
yes. And what do you do with your? I know, but for the listeners,
So I mean, I'm still quite relatively new to foraging. I've done it for the last few years. It wasn't something I was born knowing, growing up doing. But I started foraging when I originally did a course in herbalism, and we went on some sort of foraging walks where we got to identify certain plants out, kind of really just in parks actually. It was around like the Holborn area that we did it. And the herbalist at the time was just pointing out all these plants and things that we see every single day and listing off their medicinal benefits to them. And it was a real eye-opener where you think, oh my gosh, that's like a weed I see every day, and yet it's got all these amazing like healing benefits to it. So over time, that's really grown for me, and I'm some like sort of home herbalist. I like to make a lot of my own infusions and things, and I also like to use herbs in sort of somewhat spell work and my spiritual practice. So being able to identify these plants and things, it's really great to go out and gather them. And yeah, again, I think it really highlights you, sort of brings you closer to a connection with nature. You kind of keep an eye on the seasons, and like you're watching for when different things are going to grow, and it just brings you so much closer to that relationship with the earth.
Yeah, you were very aware of what is happening when as well.
Definitely, yeah.
And you've also set up your own beauty brand or skincare brand, body brand, which you also use your foraging skills in it as well. It's called Moonseed.
Yes.
And everybody can find it on the website. Is it Moonseed?
Moonseedrituals.com.
Moonseedrituals.com and the Etsy shop as well. Going back to the witchcraft practices, my sort of personal vision was all witches have an altar. They love pentagrams, and they've got their own book of spells, and I've now learned it's called Book of Shadows. So what can you tell me about those altars and rituals and symbolisms and books?
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, I think to begin with, I think both you and I, we are children of the 90s. We grew up during a period of time that there was such like a great boom of witches in pop culture. We grew up with Buffy, we had The Craft, we had Charmed, Sabrina, and so we were really exposed to that real kind of like cliche witchcraft thing, which did involve altars and pentagrams and books of shadows and things. And I absolutely love that, and I definitely that is responsible for me kind of delving into that when I was younger and deciding that I wanted to be a witch. But I do think as well that they are very kind of obvious cliche things of like, oh, this is what you have to be a witch. And I have an altar that I occasionally use. I think I've seen some people, there's some great people on Instagram that have some of the most beautiful altars, and they're always updating them all the time, and I'm so envious when I see them, all these beautiful things that they have. And but I also think too, you don't need to have that in order to be a witch either. And again, when it comes down to things like pentagrams and stuff, I think their sort of symbolism, they're used quite a lot in Wicca. They're very like old symbols, and again, they're not something that you need to be wearing or wearing t-shirts and covering yourself with them to sort of proclaim that you're a witch either. But again, they all kind of encapsulate different elements of witchcraft, and so it's really up to you if you decide that they're things that you want to go down. I think altars are really great for when you need something to focus on, and I think with you with your crystals, and you've got your little display of crystals somewhere, and for you it's a sort of space that you can go to that you can kind of look at them and be channeled by that energy. And I think for a lot of people that's what altars do for them.
Yes.
And then in regards to books of shadows, again, some people have them, some people don't. I think of them more along the lines of like a grimoire, which is sort of an old term used for kind of like your book that you would like collect. You would record your spells and your ritual practices. Maybe you've got like a herbal combination that you've used in a spell and you want to record that. And I always have this idea of you pass it down to all the generations. Your great grandchildren have it. I sometimes use one, I sometimes don't. I've got one that I write down like a lot of my recipes in it. I love to do a lot of like cooking, like spell work with my cooking, and also my product recipes. So that's kind of what I use mine for. Nowadays, I think with like how people are really into journaling and things and scrapbooking, I've seen some really beautiful examples of grimoires now that are like beautifully decorated, and they're almost like a daily journal for people. So I don't think they're kind of as ominous sounding as like these sort of like dark spell books that people used to sort of identify with.
Voldemort's coming, basically.
Exactly. But I have seen some like in like history books and stuff, some very old sort of grimoire books, and they just look so fascinating with all their like unusual symbolism and things. So there is definitely like a charm for that, and I really sort of admire people that have that time to really focus on building that.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it takes a lot of work, I guess, to keep books like that, even journaling.
Yeah.
And then never mind all the symbols and all the artworks, because they are artworks often. And so you mentioned a few times like spells that you use. What can I ask what type of spells they are like?
Yeah, so again, I probably I'm not someone that heavily uses spell work in my practice, I have to admit. I know some people who I've seen again on social media who very regularly, implement spell work into their practice, and which is great. To me, I think that was one of the reasons actually that I created my brand when I started off doing the bath products, because in a way, a lot of the time I would sort of utilize my spell work in, having a bath. It's one of the most relaxing ways to do it.
Yes.
Where you can sort of incorporate all those herbs and salts, and the most you have to do is relax in it and kind of envision what you want. So occasionally, every now and then, I think something might call for a little bit of spell work, whether it's something to do with like protection. I've actually been working with a close friend recently. We've been building sort of a bit of a protection spell together recently.
Oh, wow.
And also, if you're sort of looking for a new job, or you kind of just want to help turn your luck around a bit, they're great things to utilize, but for me, they're very simple. They're just working with things that are around me. I don't heavily research then. It's very, very intuitive. And I think it morely would involve things like, salt, which is quite purifying, burning certain herbs, because obviously using smokes as, with sage and things like that, and rosemary are really great. Again, purifying aspects. And at the end of the day, I think, especially when it comes to spell work and even witchcraft in general, it's all about intention. So as long as you are channeling the right type of energy, you've got the right type of thoughts, that can be any type. That could be a spell within itself. Almost a form of manifestation is essentially like spell work. You're kind of, trying to manifest something, thinking on something, and like channeling that energy.
Oh wow, that's so cool. Yeah, because I love manifesting things. Me with my crystals manifesting. Some witches can interpret that as a spell.
Yeah, definitely.
Basically.
Something as simple as that.
Wow.
Because I think, like you said, it is really about your intention behind it. And, I do see sometimes these really detailed spells that people do. I've seen them online and I think, oh, wow, they like sound so interesting. But I think that is why I still like to fall under the umbrella of an eclectic witch, because I kind of don't really like rules, and I don't like to be told, well, if you want to do, if you want protection, you need to have this colored candle, you need to have this stone, you need to do this at this time of night in this position facing this direction. Like, I can't handle all of that. No. I need, to me, like I say, it's very intuitive, so I much prefer just to kind of feel my way through and do what kind of feels right for me.
Yeah, because I think on TV again, you see they come up with some strange language and nobody knows what they mean, and they do all the dances in the moon. And I've watched too much Outlander, I think. But yes, you know what I mean.
There's nothing wrong with dancing around stones under the moon.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. No, definitely not. I think it's very cool, especially the strange languages. I think it's very cool. But that's sort of the ideas that people who don't know about witchcraft have it in their head. And then I've learned that a group of witches is called a coven, or like a solitary witch. Do you have a coven as well?
No, so I definitely would say that I come under a solitary witch. I think for years and years, that's all I really ever knew. Before sort of the growth in social media, that you could connect with other people, most people wouldn't really know where to have looked for other people who were practicing. Occasionally there might have been an ad somewhere on like Facebook or something saying, come and gather at this pub, and I was always too nervous to go and meet people. And I think there is something really lovely about having a community of people, and luckily with the growth in social media, I do find nowadays there's like a group of people that I connect with online who very loosely I would consider like my coven. They're people who are on the same page as me, but maybe down the track that's something I'd like to look into. But again, I like to kind of do my own practice and sort of follow my own rules. So when you do have a group, you're kind of having to sort of follow more of a structure, which, sort of, I think covens are great. I know they're quite big in Wicca practices and things, and there's a few local ones around, and I think they're a great way to meet people. Yeah,
and I see on social media also people, they call themselves high priestess or high priestesses. So what does that mean?
Yeah, that is something that I do see pop up a lot as well. I think that that's used in many different things, not just witchcraft. I definitely see that when it comes down to things like goddess worship, and if you ever go to like Glastonbury, there's loads of different workshops there that are sort of goddess workshops, and you can grow up these different levels of becoming a priestess. And within, again, in Wicca, you've got the different levels. Depends how you move up within the practice. Again, myself, I don't personally identify too much with that, but it definitely to me brings to mind images of the old stories of the Isles of Avalon and the high priestesses and the Druids and things. So yeah, I think, if that is something that you're interested in, there's so much information now about that, and so many different groups and workshops you can go on to kind of work your way through those different levels.
Okay, so they are, so even within the covens, there are like levels.
In some, not all, but in some groups, you'll have the different like hierarchy of like the high priestesses and the high priests, and
they're sort of like the leaders of that.
Yeah, I guess they're probably the people who have, the most amount of education and time, they've been working on their practice, and they tend to be the ones who will then initiate new people into their circle.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And talking about initiations, do you know of any initiations you have to do or that are like known?
Sort of to become a witch?
Yeah, to become a witch, or even how do you become a witch?
No, I think, again, if you are, getting into Wicca and you decide to join a coven or a circle, then there's going to be an initiation ceremony into that coven, which is really lovely. I think, it's a great way to sort of invite you into something. But if you yourself want to explore witchcraft or become a witch, there's nothing telling you can or you can't. I think something that I do see a lot these days is you've got people promoting these companies that you pay a lot of money for in order to learn to become a witch. And they say, well, after you've done this, you'll become a witch. And I think, well, obviously, there's some great courses and tutorials out there about different practices, and if people have a wealth of knowledge, then of course, you want to share that with people and create workshops. But I don't think you need to be spending lots of money just to say that you're a witch. I was calling myself a witch at like 13. I wasn't back then. It was based on we didn't even have we weren't online back then looking at stuff. So it was just based on how I felt, and I never knew that you had to potentially do a course before you became a witch. So I think
become certified
and
witch.
Certainly our ancestors never had to do that. So at any point you can call yourself a witch, as long as you just have like the right intentions in mind when you do it.
Yeah, and you also see about black and white magic. I think that's a very old concept.
Yeah.
What is sort of the difference for people that don't know?
Again, I think it depends on your practice. I see a lot of like TikTok accounts and stuff sort of talking about light magic, dark magic. I remember having this like book years ago when I was like a teenager, and it was like this purple velvet book, and it was like white magic and things, and there was always that kind of image that white magic was positive things, spells for like good intent, and then black magic was like cursing and hexing people. Again, I have never ever kind of gone down that route at all in my practice. I think you can't have light without dark, and vice versa. I think that, again, it is about intention. I personally would never want to use any of my practice to sort of do anything negative to anyone, because I would always feel that if you're going to put that negativity out to somewhat harm somebody, that's going to come back to you anyway. So, it's just like with anything, really, isn't it? I think that there shouldn't really be a definition between white magic, dark magic, black magic, any of that, because you can't have one without the other. You need a balance.
Yes. So, it's always two ways, isn't it?
It is.
It's like the whole of the universe.
Yeah, exactly. It's like in nature and everything. And I think that's the most important thing, is trying to replicate the natural world as much as possible. There's not one or the other. You've got the shadows, you've got the lightness and everything. So it's just kind of working with both of those in harmony.
Definitely. Oh, wow, it's so interesting. I love this. There's loads of different types of witchcraft, as we've learned today. And then I was listening to another podcast. It's called The Magic Hour.
Oh, yes.
Which you told me to listen. And I think it's great. I think she does a great job. And there was another witch on there. There's a guy from Scotland. Or I think he's English, but he lives in Scotland. And he was talking about the different kinds of natural witchcraft. So if like a garden witch or a kitchen witch. But also he was talking about ancestral witchcraft. So what does that mean? Like, especially the ancestral, how does that work? Is that you worship your ancestors, or do you contact them, or?
Well, it depends, I think. I think for a lot of people, if someone to say that they were an ancestral witch, they're more so referring to the fact that they come from an ancestral line of witches. So you'll have some people who's maybe their mother was classified themselves as a witch, their grandmother did, which, is great. And I think there's probably a lot of people out there who are like that. I do think when it comes down to people who might claim that they are from, a pure line of witches all the way down, I kind of wonder, how is that possible? Like, you know, my family is heavily into our ancestry. My mum's obsessed with ancestry.com, and, you know, we've looked through all of our ancestors, and I don't think there'd be any way to ever find out whether or not someone from the 1700s, some ancestor, was a witch. You know, particularly the sort of
documentation.
And how this country was with religion at the time. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, we all would have had ancestors that were following some sort of folk practice, you know, just how things were. So, you know, I think personally, when I sort of use the term ancestral, I often like to think about how, well, my ancestors, you know, they came from Ireland and Scotland and Wales and England, and, you know, from that particular region, maybe what are those folk practices that they were sort of doing in that area at that time, and sort of connecting with that. So you feel like you are having some sort of connection with those old ancestors, and you're really getting in touch with that.
Yes.
So I guess in a way, I think that's what people kind of refer to when they talk about that. Obviously, a lot of people incorporate like working with their ancestors in their magical practice, particularly around the times of Samhain, Halloween. It's such a great time to be connecting with your ancestors. As they say, the veil is a bit thinner, and so yeah, you know, there's always great ways to sort of work with that.
And you also you actually mentioned them before, the Druids.
Yes.
So what is that?
The Druids, that is, so the Druids kind of, it's tied up with Celtic history, and they were essentially not a religious order, but I'll use that for lack of any other term, but a religious order within Celtic tradition. So I guess pre-Christianity, you know, pre-priests and things, you would have had these Druids, and they were a combination of male and female, and they sort of upheld what the sort of religious and spiritual beliefs were of the people. And you know, over time, you know, that has kind of morphed and changed. There was a real resurgence of this sort of idea of Druidry during like the 1800s, when people really got into spirituality, and it was very much a bit of like a boys' club back then. And now you've got sort of neo-Druidry, and I think that now that we've got so much access to historical records, and we have a better understanding about the Celts and our ancestors and things, nowadays people are able to kind of connect a bit more with maybe what we think they could have been doing back then. Because right now, the only information we really have are accounts by the Romans of what they saw the Druids as, and the image that they kind of present of them are these like hairy wild men and bare-breasted women like attacking them with, you know, dogs and spells and all of that. It's really interesting when you read about it. So, you know, I do hope over time we do gather more information about them. But there's a few different Druid societies in the UK, and they actually do like workshops, and you can actually do the proper training to become a Druid.
Oh wow!
So yeah, that's really interesting.
They're still going on.
Yeah,
basically.
definitely. Yes. You know, back in the day, I think it was something like, and when I say back in the day, I'm talking about, you know, pre-Christian times.
Yes.
You know, they do believe that it would take some people 20 years to be initiated as a Druid. So, not saying you need to do that now. They have some sort of like condensed courses that you can do to become them, but it is still a lot of work to train to become a Druid.
Oh wow, so that's a proper, that is one of those like become a certified Druid type that you can't, like as a witch you can identify as a witch anytime, but with a Druid you have to sort of be.
I think you can still definitely identify with the practice, and of course you can classify yourself as a Druid even if you haven't done those courses. Right. I don't think you need, if you decide to learn all that stuff yourself, but I think it probably does help to say that you are, you know, officially a Druid through this particular company or like resource.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And the names of or the terms Wicca and witches, is that actually a unisex term? Do you use it for both genders?
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously in Wicca, because it is a religion, you would say that you practice Wicca. In regards to being a witch, I think there's always been that kind of image in people's heads that witches are women, and I think maybe because you've had the terms like wizard or warlock for like a man, but they are slightly different things, and I think of course like anyone could identify as being a witch nowadays, and a lot of men were persecuted as being witches back in the day, you know, so equally as women. So absolutely, people can identify from any gender if they're a witch.
As a witch as well. Yeah, because what's a warlock? What's the difference?
I don't actually know. I think, you know, my images of a warlock is very much influenced by like Buffy.
Yes.
So, you know, that's something I need to look at actually. I always used to think it was like the male version of a witch when I was a teenager.
That's why
but I never hear anyone reference like call themselves that. It's
Yeah.
always very tied up with like fantasy books and things.
Yeah.
So I hope I'm not offending anyone by laughing about that. I am going to look into it now
Yeah.
when we finish this podcast.
Yeah, we
but
need to learn about
yeah,
it.
what is a warlock?
What is a warlock? If
Yeah.
anyone identified as a warlock, please make
Yes.
yourself known, because we'd love to talk to you.
Definitely.
Because that is something that I definitely don't know anything about. But I thought the same thing as you did. Warlock was the male equivalent of a witch, actually.
And I guess when you think of like Harry Potter, and he goes to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, so it's kind of defining the two. But no, absolutely, there's definitely lots of men out there that identify as witches.
As witches, yeah. I think it's important that we all know that as well.
Yeah.
We briefly talked about that everybody can identify themselves as a witch. But if someone's listening now and someone is really curious, where do you suggest they will go to learn about it, or to become a witch, or to confidently identify themselves as a witch?
So I don't think you should Google how to become a witch because you'll probably come up with 100 different unusual things to do to become that. I think first and foremost is kind of getting a clear idea of why you want to become a witch, why you want to sort of look into it, what your intentions are, and then sort of going from there. There's some great books out there that you can, pop in and have a look at. There's some great bookshops actually in London that really cater for those things. I particularly love like Treadwell's and Watkins, because they also do some talks and workshops that you can actually hear from, specialists in the industry kind of talking about things. So that's a really great way also to connect with people. Again, as much as I say social media, it has its pros and cons. It is a great way to kind of see other people in the community, what their practices are, and kind of get an idea of maybe what you're attracted to. So definitely, use Instagram and things. It's a great way to discover new witches. And also, I think, I think at the end of the day, like I said, it's about intention and, just being really clear on why you want to sort of go down that route, and I don't think you can kind of go too wrong.
No, that's true. As long as you don't do crazy certifications, as you said.
Yeah, exactly. And as long as you're not doing it because you want to put like, a spell on your ex, or like, like
bad intentions,
curse someone that you don't like. I think, I think anybody can be a witch from any culture, from any tradition. Every different culture has had their own version of what they see as a witch as well. I think the most important thing is probably just getting in touch with what your culture is and what your cultural practices are, so you're not offending anybody. There is just so much information out there about every different cultural practice, so just have fun with it and explore something new and kind of test the waters and maybe see what area you want to sort of focus more on.
And put the positive out there, because we both believe in karma, people, so what goes around comes around. Exactly. I guess. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for this. I've learned a lot. I think it's a great subject that we can probably talk about for many hours. Definitely. And even into different particular streams as well. But I want to thank you so much for this one. That's okay. I think it's a great introduction to witchcraft.
Yeah, and thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Great. Talk to you soon.
See you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Tali Loz podcast. Next week we'll have Vashla, who will tell us everything about Akashic records.